Hello there and welcome to today's webinar on setting up your payroll using Sage Business Cloud Payroll. My name's Duncan. I'm your host and presenter for this session, and we are joined by colleagues in the background ready and waiting to answer any of your questions. So now let's take a look at what we're going to cover during the webinar. So I'm going to begin with an introduction to Sage Payroll, listing some of the key features and showing you how to access payroll via your web browser. I'll give you a quick product tour, and then we'll run through a checklist of the information that you'll need to get up and running. We're then going to look at the setup process. So we'll start by setting up a new payroll for those of you taking on your very first employee. We'll then look at moving to Sage Payroll, either using the manual method, where you enter employee details and opening balances manually, and then by importing your employee information from an FPS file. We'll run you through the auto enrolment and pension setup, and also some additional setup steps, including employment allowance claims for those of you who are eligible. And then we'll stick around at the end for 5 minutes or so just to run an extended Q&A and to continue answering those questions. A quick note, if you have already set up your software, we do have another webinar that might be more suited to your needs, where we teach you how to process your payroll from start to finish. So you can find this on our website. There's a link on the handout to sign up to the Process Your Payroll webinar. And it's a great next step once you've set up your software to get to learn how to run that payroll end to end. So back to the setup, we're going to start with that introduction, running through some of the key features of Sage Business Cloud Payroll. So as the name suggests, it is cloud-based. There's no software you need to install. It's all accessed via your web browser. And this means your payroll can be accessed anywhere from any device with an internet connection by simply logging in via your browser. Other online features include the payslips. So you can set up and use online payslips for employees to access their payslips on an online portal or via a mobile app. And it comes with auto enrolment and pensions features integrated into the software, so you can be confident that anyone that needs to be enrolled into a pension scheme will be put into that scheme. There's direct integration with Sage Business Cloud Accounting. So you can post your payroll information directly into accounting if you also use that. And there's an option to set up additional users should you have other members of staff that you'll need to cover the payroll or to run the payroll on your behalf. And we have plenty of support and help available via our website and also our friendly support team who are available 24/7. Something else just to mention is that you are in complete control of your subscription. So you can go at any time to the Manage Business Account section in Sage Payroll to check out your subscription and invoices. And if you need to make changes to your subscription, for example, if you've taken on more staff and you need to add more employees to your license, you can easily switch up or down through the range from 5 up to 100 employees in your payroll. So it's a product that grows with you, and if you need to, you can downsize as well. And there's more information about managing subscriptions available in our help center. You'll find a link to that on the current slide. So that's just a quick look at some of the features and benefits. Let's now explain how you access Sage Payroll. And as I mentioned earlier, it's all done via a web browser. So the easiest way to log in is to go to www.sage.com. Look for the login option towards the top of the page. And then under My Products, you're looking for Sage Business Cloud Accounting and Payroll, which will then present you with a login screen where you'll simply sign in with your email address and the password that you set up. So we're now going to take a quick look at Sage Payroll and what it looks like after you've completed the setup process. So if I just bring the slides down, you'll see that I'm already signed in to Sage Payroll. And the first thing you see once you've signed in is the payroll summary, which will tell you, among other things, your next pay run. So in this case, I have a monthly pay run on the 25th of August. You'll get an information section about RTI submissions that are coming up. So we've got an EPS payment that's due in 13 days, and also the status of any employment allowance claim that you've made for the current tax year. Towards the right of the summary, you'll see the auto enrolment and pension section, and this keeps you up to date with any submissions to your pension provider. Now, navigation's really simple. You'll find there are options at the top of the screen, which I'm just pointing out now. So pay runs is where you will come to actually process your payroll. So you can process the next pay run. And you can also look back at historical pay runs you've already completed by simply clicking on the pay date, where you can see information about pay slips, submissions, etc. for that completed pay run. You've then got the employees area, where you create and maintain your employee records. So this is where you would come to when you take on new employees. So you can set them up with their P45 or P46 details. You then have the pensions area, where you would set up your pension schemes. And there are also a couple of pension reports you can run, reporting on contributions and auto enrolment statuses. And then next up, you have the year-end area, when you get to the end of a tax year, where you'll be able to review your employees' pay for the full year. You'll be able to do a final submission to HMRC, and you'll also be able to produce the P60 forms, which you need to give out to your employees at the end of each tax year. Other reports are available once you've completed a pay run. So hovering over the reporting area, you can see a number of different reports, including the net pay report and average earnings and working hours. And finally, you've got your settings area. Many of these we'll be going into today. So you can check out payroll settings, payday settings when creating your calendars, data management we're going to look at when it comes to resetting your data if you do need to start again, and importing employees, again, is something that we will cover later on in the webinar. Now, once you're signed in, help is never far away, and you may have noticed on each of the tabs I've just clicked on, there is a help icon, little question mark icon, which will take you directly to the relevant help page. So this one, for example, is for your payroll settings. But you can access the main help menu by clicking help at the very top of the screen. And then from here, you can either do a search through our help files. You can use the navigation on the left-hand side to find the topic that you're interested in. And if you really get stuck and you need to contact our support team, just go to any page in our help center and scroll to the bottom. Look for the Get in Touch link just here. And then if you choose you're a customer needing help with Business Cloud Payroll, you'll see the relevant contact options listed just underneath. So currently you can contact our team via online chat or telephone. So that's your quick product tour. And this is the point that we're aiming to get you to following the setup steps that we'll be explaining in this webinar. But before I run through that setup, what I'd like to do is just take you through a checklist of the information you'll need in order to set up your payroll. So this is the checklist. This is available on the handout, which you can download from that documents icon. You'll need employer details, employee details, and pension details. And the specific information you need will depend on whether you're a new company taking on your first employee, or you're an existing payroll moving to Sage at the start of the tax year or mid-tax year. So for employer details, you'll need stuff like your PAYE reference and accounts office reference. You'll need the user ID and password that you use for PAYE online services. And you'll need to know the reporting frequency and the payment method for making payments to HMRC. And if you are an existing payroll, you'll also need to have completed the last P32 reporting period. So that's a tax month or tax quarter. And you'll need to know if you've claimed any employment allowance during the tax year. For employees, you'll need their personal details, such as full name, address, date of birth, gender, and national insurance number. If they're a brand new employee that you're just taking on, you'll need a P45 or a starter checklist, also known as a P46. And if you're moving your payroll to Sage, you're going to need year-to-date information for pay tax and national insurance for the current tax year. And you'd also need the RTI Pay ID, if available, from your previous software. Now, when it comes to employees, you can actually import a lot of this information if you can get an FPS file. That's one of the demos I'll show you later on. Third thing you'll need is pension details. So information from your provider, including any references, groups, or payment sources. The contribution details for employee and employer, including the calculation basis and how that pension gets tax relief. So is it deducted before or after tax, or is it a salary sacrifice arrangement? And the other thing you need regards pension is your staging or duties start date, which will help you to set up the auto enrolment features. So I'm going to mention some of this information as we go through the demo, but if you'd like a copy of that checklist, as I say, it's available on the handout. So let's now get straight on to the setup process. And I've tried to simplify this and break it down into 4 stages. So we're going to start by entering or confirming our employer details. We'll then take a look at setting up a payday calendar where we schedule the pay dates for the rest of the tax year. You'll need to enter or import your employee details. And then you'll need to set up your auto enrollment and pensions. And those steps remain the same regardless of whether you're a new payroll or you're moving your payroll to Sage. But if you are moving to Sage, you do have some further steps, as you'll need to provide opening balances. So that would include any employer opening balances if you've reclaimed statutory payments or employment allowance. You get that information from a P32 report, as well as employee details. That's their year-to-date information available on the P11 NIC and PAYE reports. And those employee year-to-date values can actually be imported if you go down the import routine. So we'll start with the employer details. These are really straightforward. They need to be entered in the payroll settings within your software. So you'll have either done this at the point you first set up Sage Payroll, which will be prompted for PAYE reference and accounts office reference. But you can also check or amend these details from the settings tab by going into payroll settings. So when we go into our first demo, I will show you that area. It's then a case of following our welcome wizard to choose the way that you would like to set up your payroll. So there are 3 options available to you. The first 2 are when you are moving your payroll to Sage, and the third one is for when you're taking on your first employees. So if you are moving to Sage, there's a manual option and an import option. If you're a brand new business, there'll be nothing to import, so that one is all set up manually. But it can also be used to migrate an existing payroll at the very start of a tax year, where there are no year-to-date values needed. So in this webinar, we are going to touch on each of these options, and we'll give you some quick demos on them. And I'm going to start with the simplest one, which is setting up a new payroll. So if you're setting up a new company, this will be when you're taking on your very first employee, or it could be used if migrating an existing payroll at the start of the tax year. This process is a manual process, so you'll enter the employee details manually, but there will be no opening balances required. So let's take a look at that option now in the program. So we are at the Welcome to Payroll wizard. So this is what you see on the summary screen when you have not completed the setup. And the first one I want to show you is creating a new payroll company. So let's go ahead and click on New Company. And you'll see there are just 2 steps to complete. So setting up the paydays and then adding the employees to payroll. So we're going to follow the link to set up employee paydays, which actually takes us to the settings area, the payday calendar settings, and then you can set up 1 or more calendars for your pay frequencies. So we've got weekly, monthly, 2 weekly, or 4 weekly. So I'm going to set up a monthly calendar in this example. And when we click on the option, all you would need to do is to select the day of the month that the employee is paid on. So that could be the same day each month, or it might be the last day of the month. So I'm going to go with same day of the month, and I'm going to set pay date to the 25th. And then I need to confirm the first pay run for this new payroll, which in this example is going to be the 25th of August of this year. Now, there is an option to automatically adjust the pay date if it lands on public holidays or weekends, but I'm going to switch that option off so that the pay date is always recorded as the 25th of the month. So you would then save that payday calendar, and then you've got an option of viewing the upcoming pay dates for this tax year by clicking View Payday Calendar. And you can see in this case, nice and simple, it's been set to the 25th right the way through to month 12. Last pay date of the tax year would be 25th of March. And to get back to this area, you can always go to Settings and Payday Settings. And if it is a weekly calendar, or 2 weekly or 4 weekly, very similar process. But instead of picking day of the month, you're picking day of the week. And again, you would be confirming the first pay run that you'll be running in Sage. So with that set up, I'll return to the summary and go back to that same option, New Company. We can see step 1 is now complete, and it's then a case of adding your employees to payroll. So this is the same process that you would use if you're taking on new employees to your existing payroll. But in this example, we're taking on our very first employee. So we're just going to click onto Create Employee in the top right corner, and it's a case of filling in the details. So when it comes to personal details, do make sure you're entering full names and that everything is entered accurately. So date of birth and gender, and I'm going to add 2 address lines. So I am using Street 1 and Street 2, as well as the town and postcode. You can then start to enter employment details. So this employee will be paid monthly. You can indicate the contracted hours. We can enter the start date for this employee. So they started on the 1st of August. Set the pay method, and if it is bank transfer, you can record bank details for your own records. If the employee has director status, you'll need to tick the box they're a director and choose the preferred calculation method for national insurance, as well as indicating the directorship start date. And then for pay documents, payslips and P60s, you can choose at this point whether you're going to be printing or emailing the documents. And if you do choose the email option, you'll need to provide an email address and a password, which will password protect those documents when they're sent out to your employees. Now, the other option is online payslips, and I'm going to mention where you can set that up later on in the demo. Finally, for a new starter, you need to provide the previous tax details. So it would usually be a P45 that they bring with them from their previous employer. So you would select the employee statement that applies to that employee, A, B, or C. You can see the statements once you make a selection. Set the NI category, and in this case, you would enter tax code, leaving date, and the pay and tax to date from the P45. Or if they don't have a P45, choose the P46 option. Get them to fill in a starter checklist, which you can get on the gov.uk website. And then you can assign the relevant NI category and choose the circumstances. So again, I've chosen statement B. I can then click on to save. As you can see, I have now created my first employee. So if I now head back to the summary, you can see that the setup options have gone, and it's starting to build up that payroll summary that we saw earlier in the demo. We can see when our next pay date is. We've got some other tasks we need to complete with regards to pensions and employment allowance, but I'm going to cover that off a little bit later on in the webinar. So that's setting up a new company. Let's just recap some of those steps for you. So the payday calendar is set up by choosing the pay frequency and setting the day of the week or month that the employees are paid. And you can view the pay calendar to check the schedule of pay dates. A quick note, if you do need to change a pay date for any reason, you can do this at the start of any pay run, as long as the alternative pay date is in the same tax period as what the pay calendar has been set up for. So if for some reason you need to change the pay date a few days earlier, that is possible at the point you run your payroll. Second step was to create the employees. So personal details, contact details, employment and directorship. Paid document preferences if you're going to be emailing or printing, and then previous tax details. So for a new starter, P45 or P46, or if it's an existing payroll you're setting up at the start of a tax year, there is an option for existing employee. So we started with that option because it is the most simple, and we get to look at the payday calendar settings and creating employee records. But now let's focus on actually moving an existing payroll over to Sage. So there are two options you can do when you're moving a payroll. The first is to manually migrate. So you would use this option if you're moving partway through a tax year and you're happy to enter employee details and opening balances manually. So more suited perhaps to smaller payrolls or where there is no FPS file that you can import. And the other option, which we'll cover after this demo, is importing the existing employees, which would include their year-to-date values. So let's give you another demo on this one. And what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to reset this data, which will take us back to a starting point. So this might be handy if you've started setting up your payroll, you haven't actually ran it, and you decide you want to start again. So you can go into the settings menu here at the top, and you can select data management. If you then choose reset data and enter your email address, you can then delete the existing data and start again from the getting started wizard. So obviously use that option with caution, but if you have been in experimenting, you want to start again, this is how you do it. So I'm going to enter the PAYE reference and accounts office reference. And we need to confirm that we report monthly to HMRC and that we pay them using a bank transfer pay method. So other options are available if that's what suits you. So that's just setting us up. And that should take us back to the welcome wizard with those same three options. Now, if you've already been through that initial wizard and you want to check the employee details or the employer details, just go to your settings and payroll settings. As you can see, you can check and amend the details from here as well. So this time we're going to go down the manually migrate option, and I'm just going to set this up for one employee, save a bit of time. So when you click on manually migrate, it takes you into a three-step wizard where we're going to set up the pay calendar, enter the employee details and opening balances, and then we're going to confirm the details. And it is important to note that to save any of the information that you're entering here, you do need to complete all three steps. So if you're halfway through this process and you navigate away, you'll lose any information that you had already entered. So please complete all three steps, and you can go back into this wizard if you need to add further employees or check the details before you get started. So I've got my payment reporting frequency and payment method, and I just need to indicate the last completed reporting period in my old software. So in this demo, I'm going to start using Sage Payroll in August. So the last completed P32 reporting period was month 4, it was July. And then we just use this option to set up our calendar. So I'm going to set it up in the same way as before, monthly paid on the 25th without avoiding public holidays and weekends. We can then move on to step 2, and this is where we would add the employee details. So similar to what you do with a new employee, you put the employee name in and the personal details. So I'm just going to put a date of birth in and gender. Again, I'm using both address lines, and the reason for this is that some pension providers require both of those fields to be filled in. So if there aren't 2 street address lines, just split it out with the house number and street name, and then contact details if required. We then move on to the tax details tab, so we can confirm the pay cycle, contracted hours, the original start date for the employee, so back in 2020 for this one, and the payment method. We'll enter their current tax code, and NI category. And you will also need to provide an RTI Pay ID, which should be available from your previous software. But if it isn't, you'll need to create your own RTI Pay ID, which is unique to each employee. So I'm just going to put in something simple as the RTI Pay ID for this existing employee. What you then need to do is to provide the opening balances. So these are the earnings in the current tax year to date, which you would get from P11 reports or equivalent reports from your payroll software. You would tick the box to indicate the employee has been paid this tax year, and then you would start to fill in the information with their gross pay, gross taxable pay, and tax paid. And then you would provide national insurance details, which includes the contributions for employee and employer, and also the earnings between the earnings bands. So it's lower earnings limit to primary threshold to upper earnings limit. And on the slides, you'll see some screenshots of P11 reports and where you would get this information from. And if applicable, you would provide any directorship details, if they're director, statutory payments, if they've received a parental payment in this tax year, student loan repayments, if they're paying back a student loan, and if they started after the beginning of the tax year and they had a P45, you'd enter their P45 details as well. So once you've got the opening balances entered, you would click on to save. And remember, to save this information that you've just entered, you'll need to complete step 3. So go to next, click on to submit, and we now have a payday calendar and our first employee set up. And then it gives you a checklist of tasks that you'll need to complete before your first pay run. And we're going to show you these tasks in the next demo, as the same things would be required if you're importing the data. So we just added one employee at that point, but if you need to go back and add more details later, from the payroll summary, you've got the link at the top to review, edit, or further configure migrated data. And then if you click on this first link, review or edit your migrated data, that takes you back to the three-step process where you can continue adding your existing employees, remembering to complete step 3 to save any details that you enter. So that's the information entered. We're going to come back to pensions after the next demo, but let's give you a very quick recap of the manually migrate option. So it's first one currently in the Welcome to Payroll wizard. You enter the details manually. These are the P11 reports that I mentioned. So if you can get these from your previous software or something equivalent, it's the totals on these reports that would fill in the PAYE and NIC details. You've also got statutory pay details and student loans on P11 reports, so it should come in useful. And then for the employer payment values, which was part of the checklist, you would run a P32 report in your previous software, which will show you statutory pay recovered if applicable, and also employment allowance claimed. And I'm going to show you where you enter that information in the next demo. So that takes us nicely onto importing your employees. So you've just seen the manual method. It's great for a smaller payroll if you've got the information to hand and you're confident entering those opening balances. But an easier and quicker way to do it would be to import the employee details from an FPS file. So you'll need to get an FPS file from your previous software. So you can do this from any of the Sage desktop payroll software, or you'll need to speak to your current payroll provider to see if that's available. And this will automatically create the employee records and enter the opening balances. And then it's a case of checking that imported information and adding anything that's missing. So we'll give you another demo on this one. So let me just reset the data. So same way as I did before, confirming the email address. and taking us back to that starting point. I'm just going to enter my PAYE reference and accounts office reference. So you'll have been given these when you registered as an employer, and you should find them if you log into your PAYE online account. And again, I'm going to stick with monthly HMRC submissions and bank transfer payment method. Once I've been through that initial setup, we get that familiar welcome screen. And this time, we're going to choose the import employees option. So first thing it does is explains how this process works. So you'll need to find and upload your most recent FPS file. So this will have been submitted from your previous payroll software on the last pay date that you processed. If required, you can import more than one FPS file. For example, if you have weekly and monthly paid employees and they were submitted separately, and then you'll review the information that you've imported and making sure everything is correct before you complete a pay run. And there is some guidance here on where to find an FPS file if you're using Sage 50 Payroll or Instant Payroll or even other payroll providers. So I'll move on to the next step. And from here, I'm going to browse to the FPS file that I've already saved from my previous software. So I put it on my desktop, and it's this one just here that I'm going to use. It'll then check that the details within that file match the employer details that you've entered into payroll, which it does. And it'll ask you what information you'd like to import. And that can either be the personal and financial data, so the employee and year-to-date values, or if you're doing this at the start of a tax year, you can choose to import the personal data only. So we're moving across mid-tax year, so I'm going to choose personal and financial data and then click next. We can then see a preview of the employees we're about to import. We've got the option of selecting which ones we want to bring in. So we're going to bring them both in. If I then click confirm and complete import, you'll see that that has taken us to the payroll summary. And here towards the right hand side is a checklist of the remaining setup steps. So I'm going to work through these steps. Some of them you've seen already. So setting up paydays is the first step, and it's actually going to suggest a payday calendar based on the file that you imported. So if I click on this link in the checklist to set up paydays, you'll see that there's already a payday calendar set up where the day of the month has been set to the 31st. Now, if required, you can edit that payday calendar. You can view the upcoming pay dates. And as I'm happy with that calendar, I'm going to simply mark that step as complete. The next thing to do is to update the employee records. So 3 specific tasks are listed here: entering previous employment values if applicable, checking opening balances and confirming working patterns. But what you'll also need to do is to add any missing information that wasn't imported from your FPS file. So if I follow the link to update the employee records, you can see in the status that we do have RTI issues that require attention. So if I click into employee 1, at the top it warns me that the start date is required. So that hasn't been imported, needs to be entered manually. Also see that the address details are missing. So first thing I'm going to do is click edit. I'm going to add the start date because that is a mandatory field. So it was actually 1st of January 2020 in this example. And while I'm here, I'm going to add the missing address lines. And I'm then going to click save. And once you've got the missing information entered, if required, you can enter previous employment details. So this was actually an existing employee, so there's no P45 figures I need to enter. But if it was a recent employee that had a P45 when they first started working for you, you would need to edit the record and then enter the P45 details from here. You can also check the working pattern. So if it's not Monday to Friday, you can set your own custom working patterns for 1 up to 4 weeks. And then check the opening balances. These have been imported from the FPS. So we've got the PAYE, NI details, got some pension information, student loan in this case. That's all been imported. Might want to have a quick check over to make sure they look right. So it's then repeat these steps for any other employee. So I've just got one other. I'm just going to fill in that employee's start date, and we'll stick the address lines in. And I'm happy that they're on a standard working pattern and that they were an existing employee. So just a case of saving that, and I will then mark that step as complete. So that deals with the payday calendar and the employees. You've then got employer values to enter where applicable. So if you've recovered any statutory pay or you've claimed employment allowance in the tax year, you'll need to enter the value you've claimed to date. And the best place to find that information is from a P32 report. So this is a P32 that I ran in Sage 50 Payroll. I've run it for months 1 to 4. And I'm going to be starting in month 5 in Business Cloud Payroll. And you'll see that I have got employment allowance that I've claimed so far. And I've also got some SPP that I've recovered. So these values need to be entered into the software, and we can follow these links in the checklist, which actually takes us to the settings, and then we can enter the relevant values. So I had some SPP and some NI compensation. And then while you're in the settings, you can also migrate employment allowance values. So for this one, we applied for the allowance. We did that at the start of the tax year. And so far this tax year, we have reclaimed this amount. So I can reclaim the remaining allowance up to £5,000 in my new software. So a couple of steps we can tick off there. 3 more to go. The last 2 are all around pensions, so I'll cover them separately. But this one is for any employee repaying a student loan. You will need to create a deduction that you can then assign to them on your first pay run. So there's a link to do that if you need to. Set up student loan deductions, go to the deductions section to create your new deduction. And choose student loans and the type of student loan being repaid. And if I save that, that will now be available to add to the pay slip when I run the first payroll. So let's get that one ticked off. And all that remains in the setup process in that checklist is to set up our pensions and assign the employees. But I will take a quick pause at that point, just to recap what we've just done. So we went down the import option, importing the latest FPS file from our previous software. We've then worked through a checklist where we created the payday calendar. So it actually created it for us, but we can check it, make sure we're happy with it. We've reviewed the employee details, entered additional information such as start dates and addresses, P45 details if they're a recent new starter, and you can check the opening balances and working patterns. We've migrated employer values for statutory pay recovered and employment allowance where applicable, and then those final steps are setting up and assigning the pension. Now, if you were to do this at the start of a tax year, you wouldn't see some of these options, as opening balances are not required when you're starting at the beginning of a tax year. So next up, let's take a look at auto enrolment and pensions. So the auto enrolment features are built in to the software, and as an existing payroll, there are 3 steps you'll need to complete. So first of all, you'll need to confirm your staging or duty start date. So if you were an employer prior to 2017, you'll have been given a staging date by the pensions regulator. So that's the date you would enter. Or if you became an employer after 2017, your duties start date was the date you took on your first employee. You'll then need to add pension details, including the settings to calculate pension contributions, which we'll run through in the demo. And the third step is to assign your employees to that pension and to set their auto-enrolment status. So a few different statuses on that checklist and on that drop-down list, which we will have a look at in the demo. So if you've imported your details, you can set up the employer pensions by using the link in the checklist. If not, just go to the pensions tab at the top. And then first thing you'll need to do is to confirm that staging or duty start date. So in my example, I only became an employer in 2020, took on my first employee on the 1st of January. So that is my staging or duty start date. And as an existing payroll, I have already set up auto-enrolment. I'm already doing it. It's just it needs to be set up again in the new payroll software. So we're going to choose that first option. Auto-enrolment is set up. It's not postponed because we did that in our previous software. If I click on to save, it says the pension details are confirmed, and then you are prompted to add your pension scheme. So if you're moving to Sage, you are likely to have an existing pension scheme. So we can answer yes to that question. And it's then a case of adding the new pension to your payroll. So when I click on this option, if you're with one of these providers, Nest, Now Pensions, People's Pension, or Smart Pension, you can click on the relevant link to add the specific settings for that provider. Or if you're with any other pension provider, just choose Add Your Own Pension, and you can then add the custom pension settings. So in this example, I'm going to choose Nest, as they are quite a popular provider for small businesses. And I'm going to start by entering the employer reference I was given by the provider. I can then move on and add a group. So a group contains all of the settings to calculate the pension contribution. So it's really important you get these settings right. So when I click on to add group, the first thing I do is enter my group name. So this needs to exactly match the group name you set up on your provider's online portal for the integration to work correctly. And then we can choose the type of contribution, so the tax relief arrangement. So is it salary sacrifice? Are contributions taken before tax? Or are contributions taken after? So if you're not sure, check this with your pension provider. But in this example, our contributions are deducted after tax, and that's known as a relief at source arrangement. Type of deduction is most commonly percentage. So you get the payroll to work out how much to deduct. And in this case, the employer is contributing 3% and the employee will be contributing 5%. You then move on to the next step where you confirm what earnings are pensionable. So the first option, pensionable pay, is where you can choose specific payments to be used in pension calculations, and contributions are deducted from the first pound earned. But this second option, which is common for the auto-enrolment schemes, is where it uses qualifying earnings, which are earnings between a lower and upper limit set by the government. So in my example, it is qualifying earnings that are pensionable. And there's a third option, which is not commonly used, where you can set your own upper and lower limits. Then all I need to do is to confirm the date that we pay contributions to our provider. So they are paid on the 21st of each month. And we're going to set it as our default plan. It's the only pension we're setting up. So we're going to automatically enroll eligible employees into the scheme if they're not already in it. So that saves the group. You've seen there all of the settings that are used to calculate the pension. And if you're with Nest, you also need to add your payment source or sources if you have more than one. Again, making sure that the name exactly matches the settings on your pension online portal. So I'm going to tick the box to indicate it's a qualifying scheme and I'm agreeing to our terms. If I click on to save, that sets up the pension scheme. I'm confirming that it's a qualifying pension scheme. If I click back onto pensions, I can now review the pension settings if I need to, and I've got access to those pension reports. So returning to the summary, I can mark that step as complete. And then the final step is to assign the existing employees to the pension plan. So if you're using the checklist, that link will take you to the employees area. If not, you can just click employees. And then for each employee, go on to the workplace pensions tab and click edit, and then choose the relevant status. So this employee was enrolled into the pension scheme, and that happened on our duty start date. So I've filled in that information at the top, and I'm checked I'm happy with the pension scheme that they've been put into. And then repeat for other employees. So if, for example, this employee had previously opted out, to prevent them being put back into the pension before the re-enrollment date, we can set their status as opted out. We can enter the date they originally did that. So you'll see a list of status definitions. Enrolled, I guess, is the common one. Opted out might also be used if people have voluntarily left. But that is the pension setup complete. And if I just tick off that final step and refresh the summary, you can see that we are nearly there. We're nearly set up. Just a few additional setup steps to consider before we get cracking with that first pay run. So a quick recap of those steps: entering the staging or duty start date, adding pension details, assigning employees to the pension. Slightly different for a brand new company. You won't have to assign the scheme because no one will be in that scheme at that point, but you still enter your duty start date, so the date you took on that first employee. You work through a preparation checklist. It's really simple, just 4 steps to complete, and that includes adding the pension scheme details. So slightly different if you are setting up a new company. So last 5 minutes of the demo is just to run through some of the additional setup steps. So the first one I want to mention is employment allowance. If you're eligible to claim employment allowance, you can get up to £5,000 each tax year by reducing your employer national insurance contributions when making payments to HMRC. Most businesses and charities are eligible, but there are qualifying conditions. So do check those out on the gov.uk website. And if you are eligible, you'll need to submit a claim for each tax year. And if you're moving your payroll to Sage, even if you've submitted that claim in your old payroll, you still do it in your new payroll to confirm that you are still eligible. So quickly run through how that process works. Pretty straightforward. So I'm on the payroll summary, and I do want to record an employment allowance claim. So here in the RTI information, I can click on to record claim. And what I then need to do is to choose my industry sector. And if you're not in agriculture, fisheries or road transport, you would choose industrial. And then you would enter the user ID and password that you use for your PAYE online account. And top tip, you can store those credentials for future use so that you don't have to enter them each time you do a submission to HMRC. So I've entered those details. I'm going to click submit. You'll see that the submission is in progress. That should complete in just a few seconds. And then our software is then set up to continue reclaiming employment allowance if we haven't claimed it all. And that'll happen at the end of each tax period, so each tax month or quarter when you record your payment to HMRC. So you can see that claim was successfully sent, and as a reminder, earlier in the demo, we have already migrated our employment allowance values. So the system knows that we've already claimed this much, and it will just claim the remainder in the future months. So that was employment allowance. And a quick look at the P32 report. So this is what you'll get at the end of each tax period. And there's an employment allowance summary, which will help you to track how much you've claimed, how much you're carrying forward, how much you've claimed this period, etc. Other setup steps you might consider at this point is choosing a payslip template if you're emailing or printing the payslips, or alternatively, setting up online payslips if you want your employees to access their payslips in a mobile app or from a website. You could set up payments and deductions in advance if you've got specific payment names that you want to use to make it a bit quicker to add them to the payslip. You can set those all up. And if you need to, you can create additional users who will be able to log in and run your payroll in your absence. So I'll just point out where those settings are, and then we're going to run through some of the further support available. So heading back to the settings, payslip template is within the payroll settings. So this applies to email or printed payslips. You've got 3 different layouts you can choose down to personal preference and save the one that you want to use. The online payslip settings takes you into a simple 4-step process where you can set up online payslips. So choosing which employees you want to set up. They get an email invite. Payslips are published when you complete a pay run, and they can log in and download them from an online portal. So that again is within the settings. The payment and deduction settings, we have set up a deduction for student loans, but you could set up payments ahead of time just to save you time when you do your first pay run. And user management is the other one I want to show you. This is where you can invite additional users by entering an email address for them and then granting them full access to the payroll advanced permissions. So that's about it for the presentation, but as promised, I'm now going to run through some of the further support that's available, and you now have an opportunity to submit any of your final questions. So in terms of further support, we do have another webinar that follows on from this one, all on processing your payroll. You can access it from the link on the handout, either signing up to a live session or viewing an on-demand recording. You can also complete our training courses in Sage University. So it's free interactive Sage payroll training, topics such as payroll fundamentals, setting up your company, understanding absences and pensions. So really useful if you don't have a payroll background and you want to learn more. And as I mentioned towards the start of the session, if you do need to get in touch with our support team, head along to the help pages. So the help option is at the very top of the payroll software. And then once you're in the help, scroll to the Sage links at the bottom and click Get in Touch. Choose Customer Business Cloud Payroll and you'll see the contact options from there. I've even put a handy direct link to that page there in your handout. So we do now have a little bit of time for you to submit any final questions. So you can do so from the Q&A option on the controls on the right-hand side. Also, your last chance to download any of our handouts. So if you'd like a copy, PDF of the presentation, do go ahead and download them. If you're leaving the webinar now, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you found the session useful and it's given you the confidence to get things set up and get moving in Sage Business Cloud Payroll. But if you're sticking around for questions, keep an eye on the Q&A as we will be posting the answers there. So I'm going to go on to mute, but I will be back with you in a few minutes when it's time to close down the webinar. Hello again, and thank you so much for sending your questions through. It looks like we've answered them all now. So as there are no further questions, we're going to wrap things up. Thanks once again for joining us at the webinar today. Do let us know what you thought by completing the feedback survey that will appear as you leave the session today. Stay safe, and we do look forward to seeing you on some of our other webinars soon. Goodbye for now.